Welcome to the Pandemic Pinup Happy Hour. I am super excited and also super sad. It's a bittersweet day just because it is the end of the 12 Cocktails of Christmas installments. So we've been doing those every week for the last 3 weeks. This makes the fourth. So 3 cocktails a week times four, it's 12. And it's been a very interesting ride. Today we have some really interesting cocktails, I think, a little bit of culture, just because I really like to tie in different cool travel stories or cool little things that other countries do so that we can kind of enhance our holidays, learn about other cultures, be more tolerant people, and drink cocktails, right? I think that's just a great thing to do around the holidays. So, as I said, we'll be making three. We'll start with the one that isn't as cultural, if you will. It's just kind of a cocktail I came up with, and I actually came up with this about 2 years ago. And it's one of the few cocktails that I haven't felt the need to go back and tweak. And I feel like people think when bartenders or chefs create a dish, that's like the end all be all of that dish. And as human beings, we grow, we evolve, our palates change as we get older. If you're a woman, your palate changes every time you hit your hormonal cycle. So it's interesting to see recipes that one has created years later, whether it's a year later or 10 years later, or even months later sometimes, and kind of revisit it and see if there's anything you want to add, subtract, change, modify. And yeah, I've done that quite a bit. I revisit my recipes quite regularly. And when I find one that doesn't need altering after multiple revisits, that makes me feel really, really solid in a lot of the information that I've put out. So a lot of the recipes that I've done throughout the pandemic, I have revisited on my solo time and I've altered. And I've had people reach out to me after trying some of the recipes I've created and tell me that they prefer it with a different spirit or with a little more simple syrup. And that's the beauty of cocktails and recipes, is that they are kind of guidelines, because whatever you like is what you should be drinking. Don't just drink something because I told you so. Just take what I told you as a guideline and then go from there. So for our first cocktail, we're going to do one of my favorite styles of cocktails, which is an egg white cocktail. I love cocktails with egg whites. I really do. So this is called the Nose Nipper, and you will need a cocktail shaker. And just so you know, if you haven't been here before, I am a avid supporter of the traditional dry shake, where you shake without ice, and then you add in ice and shake it again, as opposed to the reverse dry shake, where you add ice, then you shake, then you strain, and then you shake it a second time, dry without ice. I feel like I've tried it both ways, and I can't see enough argument. No extra froth for me. You're right. I don't know. Like, I feel like the amount of additional froth that you get with a reverse dry shake is not noticeable enough for me to go through all of that extra effort and extra tool usage and extra dishwashing. If I find a cocktail where the reverse dry shake is a better method, trust me, I will be more than happy to own it, share it, and live by that motto. But for the most part, I just don't find it necessary. Not to say that you can't try it. So for this, our main spirit is actually going to be a liqueur that I'm very fond of called Averna. Now, Averna hails from Italy. It's from the Sicily region. It's dark and rich and caramelly, light citrus notes. It's kind of its own thing. There's ways to replace it in the sense that there are other liqueurs of similar styles in the same category, but Averna is very much its own flavor. Montenegro, for example, is another dark liqueur, but it has more eucalyptus and more lemon, less caramel notes, and less richness, in my opinion, as in comparison to the Averna. But we are going to use 1.25 ounces of Averna, and I'm going to put that right into my shaker. Now, if you have a jigger and you're like, oh no, there's not 1.25 ounces measurement, you can do what I'm doing right now, which is measuring a 3/4 ounce and then 1/2 ounce, and boom, 1.25 ounces, good to go. So that's actually our main base for the Nose Nipper, and our modifier is going to be whiskey. I'm using a blended whiskey. I've done this with bourbon, I've done it with rye. I feel like bourbon makes the cocktail just a tad too sweet for my taste, but you can dial back the sweetener if all you have is bourbon. I feel like rye kind of over amplifies some of the notes that I'm not looking to showcase from the Averna, but it's also not unpleasant. It just kind of depends on what you're trying to do. I'm going with a blended whiskey. I'm using Texas Ranger. None of the brands I use am I sponsored by. I just like to share the ones I like. That way, if you taste them, we can talk about things that we both know. However, use any blended whiskey you can get in your market. Crown is a blended whiskey, blended Canadian whiskey. It's a little on the sweeter side. It's sweeter than this one. So if you do happen to have Crown and that's all you have at your like immediate disposal, then probably dial back the sweetener a little bit. But I'm going to use a 3/4 ounce of our Texas Ranger blended whiskey. And then we're going to add some freshly squeezed lemon juice. I love fresh squeezed. 'Tis the best. So 1/2 ounce of that right in there. And then we're just using regular simple syrup. Nothing crazy this week, guys. No infused simple syrup for this particular recipe, but we will for another one. 1/2 ounce of that. And then the egg white, duh. I love egg whites. Love egg whites. If egg whites or egg yolks in cocktails make you feel some kind of way, reach out to me. Let's talk about it. I want to get you on my side of the fence. But I want you to feel comfortable. You know, I don't want this to be like I'm pushing egg whites on you, but I kind of want to. So putting a whole egg white in there, not a whole egg, just the egg white. We're going to dry shake, no ice. So I like to shake without ice for about 10 to 15 seconds. You can go longer. If you like frothier cocktails, then shake as long as your biceps will let you. Trade off, one arm to the other. Just go around this side. If you have somebody at home, shake for a while and then give it to somebody else. Let them shake it for a while. That's kind of how the gin fizz is made. It just kind of depends on how much froth you actually want. So that's about 10 seconds. Let's say that. I'm going to add some ice. Ooh, put my special ice down there. And it doesn't have to be a whole lot. I'd say if you are using a cocktail shaker, you'd be using about 1/2 or 3/4 amount. That would go in the small end. We're going to shake it again. All right. Now, I didn't overshake that. You can tell that was maybe 10 seconds. But you could go further if you wanted to. I don't want to over froth this cocktail. I do want the texture and the way that the egg white tends to hold aroma, but I'm not trying to make it into a fizz. So with that being said, I have a cute little cocktail glass that I have at the ready. And seeing as it is Christmas, or about to be, this is the last of our classes, I figured I'd open a bottle of champagne. Family so I have an excuse to drink a bottle of champagne after this class is over. But yeah, we're going to pop a bottle of champagne. My recommendation for this cocktail is cava, and that's kind of a Spanish, well, not kind of, it is a Spanish sparkling wine. It tends to be drier in style, and you could just use a brut champagne if that's what you have access to. You could use a Prosecco if you like sweeter wines, but the dry character of the cava really complements this cocktail. So, little effort needed, but we're going to get there. So I'm going to double strain this cocktail, and I know there's so much going on here today, so it's kind of hard to see, but I will do my very best to also bring these cocktails up to the screen so you don't miss any of the good stuff. So I'm going to strain this cocktail right into my glass. And I like to double strain this just because I want this to be kind of delicate in texture. So I'm making sure that I remove any ice chips that were in there. If for some reason the egg white had the little bits and pieces that come with it, for those of you who aren't queasy, also known as the umbilical cord, just making sure that it did get broken up properly. And in case it didn't, I'm going to strain it out. So once I have that double strained, let me get the most out of it there. I'm going to top it off with my sparkling wine. And it's not a whole lot. Like you can tell my glass is kind of small. This is getting about 1 ounce to 1.5 ounces of champagne. So it leaves plenty for mimosas if that is your thing. And then I have a lemon peel, and I'm going to express the oils right on top and then just leave that little coil. So I'm going to come around and show you guys the nose nipper. And almost looks like an espresso martini. It's so good. Oh my gosh, it's so tasty. There is something about the dark Italian, like caramel leaning liqueurs, when you combine them with citrus, they become so beautifully bright. It takes something that's so rich and deep and just gives it like this added layer that is so nice and so uncommon. A lot of people tend to pair those flavors with like orange because it kind of goes with dark spirits, right? If you think an old fashioned, we think orange peel, those oils have a little bit more richness in flavor. And I find that when I combine it with lemon, it just becomes so pleasant. It also becomes less heavy. So it's easier to sip. It doesn't sit as heavily in your stomach. A lot of these liqueurs are meant as digestifs, which means that they are meant to be drank after eating. They help you digest so that you can drink and eat more. So consider this a digestif cocktail with that added citrus in there to just help you along your path of boozy goodness. Oh, it's really nice. So yeah, that is the nose nipper. Nothing too crazy. Then we're gonna make something I'm calling the Jingle Jumble. That's kind of a mouthful. Now the reason I'm calling it Jingle Jumble instead of like Jingle Jangle, which is a very classic like Christmas phrase or idiom, is because this is a twist on a cocktail called a rebujito in Spain. So a rebujito is a sherry spritzer, for lack of a better description, within things that we're most common with in the United States. But it's quite simply lemon juice, some kind of sweetener, a sherry that you like, and some kind of bubbles, preferably tonic. They really like their tonic in Spain. They have a ton of gin and tonic bars. If you think you know gin and tonic and you haven't been to Spain, you don't know what's going on. They have bars that are just gin and tonic. You'll walk in and there's 200 tonics and 100 gins lining the walls, and you just kind of tell them what kind of things you like, and they'll create something for you. It's absolutely fascinating. It's magical. But the rebujito translates as a little jumble or all jumbled up in that particular language. So I thought it would be kind of fun to jingle jumble. And we're going to make a holiday inspired rebujito. So for that, you will also need a shaker. And we are going to be using a 3/4 ounce, I believe. Let me double check. Yeah. A 3/4 ounce of freshly squeezed lemon juice. Now, I did try this recipe with a 1/2 ounce of lemon juice and a 1/4 ounce of grapefruit. It was really, really nice. However, I think it goes better with a different style of sherry. There's a lot of different kinds, from sweet to dry, just like regular wine. So have fun with this. This is a very basic cocktail, but it is really interesting because it only has 4 ingredients. It's very simple. And if you just kind of alter one thing for another, you'll have an entirely different cocktail. So 3/4 ounce of our lemon juice. Our sweetener is an allspice syrup. So I'm using a 3/4 ounce. So if you are trying to play with this later, the ratios are equal parts lemon to equal parts simple, because a lot of these rebujitos are made with lemonade and tonic and sherry. That's like the quick street version. So we're kind of essentially making a lemonade there, but it's got that note of allspice in it. And then I'm going to put 2.5 ounces of sherry. And I'm using an Amontillado sherry, which is a little drier, has some like nutty tones to it. And I just find it really, really pleasant. There's a lot of different styles of sherry. That's its own class. I should probably do just a class on sherry-based cocktails at this point, because I've used a lot of sherry over the holidays. It's great to cook with. That's how most people are familiar with it, but it's fantastic in cocktails. It's also just fantastic on its own. So in here, we have 3 ingredients. The simple syrup, which is made with allspice. We have the lemon juice, and we have the Amontillado sherry. So I'm going to add some ice. Rogue ice. And then I'm going to shake. And this one is, if your tonic or your mixer is chilled, then you can probably shake this for only about 10 seconds. But I totally forgot to chill my tonic. So I'm going to hyper chill this and try to shake it for about 15 to 20 seconds. So when I add my tonic, it doesn't become warm. Okay, so for you at home, keep your tonic in the fridge, unlike the professional bartender who doesn't know what she's doing. And then you can only shake for 10 seconds and save some time. being shaken, we're going to go back to one of my favorite things. It's been a while, guys, since I've brought it out. But I have Sonic Ice again, and my life has been so lovely ever since. So I have a whole cup of Sonic Ice that has been poorly melted and remelted. As you can tell, I have this giant block. But I'm going to put some of that into my really pretty cocktail glass. And then put this giant chunk of Pebble Ice back in there. This is why I just need a Pebble Ice maker in my house. It would make me so very happy. Santa, if you're out there and you're listening, I want a Pebble Ice maker for Christmas. Actually, no, I don't have space for that, but when I've made it, I will have a Pebble Ice maker in my house. So I like to add the tonic to my shaker as opposed to just topping it off, so that when I pour my cocktail into my glass, it's properly mixed instead of just being like tonic to the face and then cocktail on the bottom. So this tonic is something I've discovered recently, and it is amazing. Tonic is kind of a very divisive ingredient. Either you love it or you hate it, from what I can tell. I used to love gin and tonics growing up. That was kind of my thing in college, and then I became a very avid whiskey drinker. I still love gin and tonics, but I found this brand called Double Dutch, and they had a bunch of flavors. And I thought this was going to go really, really well with cranberry ginger, and I was like, ooh, that just sounds good for this season, right? Cranberry, ginger, sherry, lemon, allspice. It sounded great. However, when I paired it, it was nice, but then I used this one. It was a pomegranate basil tonic, and it was amazing. So if you have the ability to find this tonic, use this tonic. I am highly recommending the pairing with pomegranate and basil, but if you can't find it, just use tonic. It's fine. You can use a citrus tonic, elderflower tonic. There's a ton of them out there. And I think the cocktail benefits from about 3 ounces. You can add a little more, you can add a little less. You can add a little less and then add more as you drink it to see what you like. I'm going to add about 3 ounces to my shaker. And then I'm going to strain this over my ice. I have this really nice highball style cocktail. I have this super cool lemon garnish that I prepared. And I'm going to bring it over to you guys because I know it's really cluttered over here. I want y'all to be able to see this Jingle Jumble and this really pretty cocktail glass. It's a garnish. Look at that. Really simple. It's basically just a highball, but it tastes really festive. Oh my gosh, it's so good. It's so strange to me how the pomegranate and the basil still come through, considering there's so much going on in this cocktail. And the flavoring in the tonic is rather subtle. It's not like you drink the tonic and you're like, pomegranate and basil. But I think the spice from the syrup and then that nice brightness from the lemon juice that we add in there just kind of bring those notes a little further to the surface. So it ends up being really, really nice. So that is the Jingle Jumble. Or whatever you end up saying after you've had 2 or 3 of these. Pretty sure you'll forget and you'll just say the sherry cocktail. But moving on from Spain to Italy again, I am super excited to share one of my favorite hot holiday beverages / cocktails from Italy, and my riff on a riff, if you will. So the first thing is we're going to discuss what this cocktail is, as I have some of my things heat up and come to the proper temperature. So we're going to make something that is inspired by a cocktail called the Bombardino. So the Bombardino is this really fun, hot, boozy as hell beverage that you get served at a lot of like ski resorts or snowed in places, especially in the Alps in Italy. And it's a zabaglione, which is a custard. And then they add booze to it, traditionally brandy, and then they top it off with whipped cream. And then they usually serve it with like a cookie or a chocolate on the side. And Bombardino means little bomb. And it's called that because when you drink it, it is a bomb. It is a bomb of flavor. It is a bomb of sugar. And it is a bomb of booze. And it hits like all the good spots. What's really interesting is some people will try this at home and then say, oh, I'm okay without the whipped cream. Usually that would be me. I'm one of those people that if I got like some kind of coffee at Starbucks, let's say, I usually get it no whip. But the whipped cream adds in an additional fat layer, which really kind of softens those aggressive alcohol notes that can be found in a Bombardino, because they heat the spirit and they heat the custard cream that goes into it. Now, one of the riffs on that, because there's many, one of my favorite riffs is the calimero. So the calimero is a bombardino with coffee. So it has the zabaglione, it has the spirit, which is usually brandy, and then it has coffee. And if y'all have been around enough to watch enough of these classes, or unfortunate enough to watch enough of these classes in the pandemic, you know I love coffee, and you know I love like eggy things. So this was like a natural pairing for me because zabaglione, if you drink it hot, is kind of like a really frothy eggnog. So we're gonna make a riff on the Calimero version of the Bombardino. And I know these are a lot of crazy foreign words, but don't get it wrong. At the end of the day, I decided to call this Monte Bianco because that makes it easier. Let me give you more Italian words to say. So Monte Bianco is a singular mountain within the Alps that is very popular to go and ski. And it's really pretty. I feel like if you look up pictures of it and then you drink this cocktail, you'll be like imagining yourself there. So I kind of wanted to give you the lesser known Alp mountain to go ski. It's kind of the difference between going to somewhere in Colorado. I feel like a lot of people go to Vail, or I'm trying to think of another really popular Colorado destination. But I remember Vail being really popular when I was younger. And then like Crested Butte was on like the very outskirts of the map. No one knew where that was. And then I think as I got older, Crested Butte got more popular, and like Golden, Colorado was kind of like the outlier. So think of it like that. If you go to Italy and you go to the Alps, there's a lot of different mountains, a lot of different ski resorts, a lot of different places to go. But Monte Bianco is probably the least visited by tourists. So if you ended up there, you'd be surrounded by a lot of real nitty gritty culture. You would have a hard time speaking to people if you didn't speak their language. You would have a hard time getting around, but it is such a beautiful little town to get lost in. It's so colorful, and it is exactly what you imagine a snowed in Italian Alp Christmas village to be. So you'll remember the name after you see the cocktail title posted on Instagram, or if you're part of the Pandemic Pinup Happy Hour group on Facebook. The flyers get posted every week with all of the preparations and how to make them, the base things, and the name of the cocktail is on there. So make this at home. Please look up a picture of Monte Bianco in the Alps in Italy, and then tell me what you think. Tell me how your experience was. Did it take you there? So to make Zabaglione, it's not hard, but for some reason it really intimidates people. So I really wanted to do this on camera so you can see that it is really not that difficult of a thing to do. The one thing you have to be concerned with is overcooking your eggs, because we are making kind of a frothy eggnog, but we don't want scrambled eggs. No one wants scrambled eggs in their cocktail, or maybe you do. I don't know. I don't. So I'm going to teach you how to make sure you don't make scrambled eggs, because that's the important part. If you go too far, you can just start over. So we're going to start small. The recipe calls for 3 egg yolks, which I have in this glass bowl here, and I mainly have it in the glass bowl so that y'all can see it. You can do this in a stainless steel bowl. You can do this in a ceramic bowl if you had it. You can do this in a pot. What you want to make sure you can do with whatever your vessel is to set it on top of a pot that has water in it. Now my pot with water is here, but I'm not putting it over there yet because it's starting to get hot and I don't want to start cooking my eggs quite yet. So the key is, whatever your vessel is, if it is set over your pot of water, it can't touch the water. There has to be space in between the level of the water and the bottom of your vessel. So in this case, I think I have about 1 inch of water, so that leaves me about 1.5 inches to 2 inches of space. And what that does is create something called a bain-marie, or baño Maria in Spanish, and it's basically a water bath. So that steam is hotter than the water, and it's cooking the thing in your vessel, in this case, our zabaglione. But because it's in 2 different vessels, if it starts to get hot, you can just pull it away and it doesn't retain heat as much as if it had been set in water. So it'll cool down quicker, it's easier to control. You could do this directly in a pot without the whole water bath thing. And I've done that before, but it requires you to be very much on the ball, very much paying attention, even more so than with this method. So I've got this water on medium-high right now. I'm trying to bring it to a boil so I can lower it to a simmer. In the meantime, I have my 3 egg yolks here, and I'm going to add a 1/4 cup of sugar directly to the egg yolks. Nothing crazy. So once I've done that, you can, by hand, whisk the absolute Christmas out of these yolks, or you can use an electric mixer, which is what I'm going to do just because it's a little bit faster. With an electric mixer, you want to mix them for about a minute. egg yolks don't really get overbeaten, unlike egg whites. Egg whites will get soft, then they'll get kind of perky, and then they'll get stiff, and then they'll start to weep. And egg yolks don't do that. If you over whip by a minute or 2 minutes, maybe you're doing this in a stand mixer, it'll be okay. It'll just be frothier and thicker. But what we're looking for, and I'm going to bring up the hand cam for this, is we want the mixture of sugar and eggs to get really nice and pale yellow, really nice and frothy, and grow a little bit in volume. So while that's getting to a simmer, I'm going to pull up the hand cam, and I'm not really sure if I should mute this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it unmuted for now, and then Noobs, who is in the classroom with me, if it is wildly annoyingly loud, just like wave at me and I'll mute the screen over on my computer. So I'm going to pull up the hand cam, and then let's see if I can flip it so we can see both views. And I'm going to whisk these on about medium-high. Ooh, look at that hand cam. So I'm going to whisk these on medium to high until they get nice and frothy. So if it's super loud, Noobs, just let me know. So just a quick pause. I don't know if y'all can kind of tell, making sure it looks a little different on screen on my computer than it does on my phone, but they're already a paler yellow. The sugar still isn't fully dissolved, and that's okay, because eventually this will cook and that sugar will get dissolved. You can tell it's getting kind of creamy, a little thick, and pale in color. Now, like I said, we want to beat this for at least a minute, but you can go a little longer. So I think we've been doing that for like 20, 30 seconds. We're going to give it another 30 seconds or so. So that's pretty good. Y'all see how thick that looks? It's really nice. It kind of has the texture of like a really soft whipped cream, fairly. It's kind of hard to explain, but if you've done this before, then you'll know, and if you haven't, then when you do this for the first time, you'll know what it means. So now what we're gonna do, now that we have this ready, my pot is steaming. So the one thing you wanna remember is now that it's steaming, if I put this bowl over the pot, it's going to create a seal, kind of like putting a lid on my pot, which would cause it to boil. I don't want it to boil. You want it at the lowest simmer possible. Slow and low is the way to go, because fast will get you nowhere. That's not true, but fast will get you a lot of places. In this case, fast will get you scrambled eggs, and nobody wants scrambled eggs. So I'm going to turn this heat down a little bit before I seal it with my bowl. Just for ease, I'm going to remove these and switch to a hand whisk. Y'all don't have to do that. It's just for me. I have very limited space here. So what I'm going to do is place this over my pot and just start whisking. And I'll bring up the hand cam in just a second so we can see what's going to happen. But one of the things you want to make sure you're doing is you want to make sure you're using a whisk. Whisks are better at giving you tactile information. And what I mean by that is if you are stirring with something like a wooden spoon, maybe you do this with a wooden spoon. Imagine your hand is, or your tool is an extension of your hand. So if you have the wooden spoon, it's still as if your hand was like this. And you're just stirring a pot like this. But a whisk, if it's an extension of your hand, it kind of turns your hand into a claw. And this will let you feel a lot more of what's going on. So whisks are better. They give you more information. And what you're going to do is stir slowly, but you want to make sure you get all the sides because that steam is hotter than boiling water. So you want to make sure you're getting all of the sides so that it doesn't start to cook and like set. And by set, I mean thicken in a bad way on the edges, because then that's kind of not recuperable. You won't be able to use it. So I'll bring the hand cam over for this. In the meantime, I also have this other burner that I just turned on because I have to make espresso. So I have my cool little espresso stovetop pot called a mocha pot. I'm gonna put that on there. It's already prepped with the coffee and the water. And then I'm gonna multitask again. Hopefully I don't make scrambled eggs, guys. Replace the spotlight, bring up that hand cam, switch hands, because I'm dominant with my right. And as you can tell, it's already starting to thicken. Now what we want to do is cook this until that ribbon right there that I'm trying to paint on the surface kind of stays on the surface a little longer. And then I'm gonna add in the port wine, because I'm making this with port wine today. You could use any kind of wine. Traditionally, this is made with Marsala wine, but I thought port wine really complemented the rest of my Carimero variation, because we'll be using rye whiskey. I think it needed a little more depth. So still gonna stir. Like I said, slow and low, way to go. You wanna make sure you're scraping those edges, getting all those little sugar crystals. Sugar is really interesting. Sugar succumbs to peer pressure all of the time. So if you can think of all of those little grains of sugar separately, they love to do what the other one wants to do. So as soon as one of them starts to melt, they all start to melt. So if you leave them on the side and they start to cook, the others are going to find out and they're going to want to cook. So check that ribbon. So it's not staying on the surface too long. Okay. Show you, we've got a light simmer going on down there. Just so you know, no boiling. It's not just like sitting there hot. We have a light simmer. You want to make sure you're making an effort to look at your water so that you know you're not boiling. Because I'll tell you, if it starts boiling, you'll know, because this will all start to like set on the ends, on the edges, sorry, as if you've like cooked an omelet, which is really unpleasant. So always just come back and check. So once it hits that thick ribbon state, which we're getting close, we're going to add in the port wine, and then we'll continue to cook it just a little bit to bring that thickness back up. And then we'll make the cocktail. And then if you haven't seen a mocha pot before, they're really nifty. Please ignore the mess on my floor. But they're really, really nifty. They have water in the bottom, coffee in the middle, and then the coffee will come up through that little spigot into the top of the coffee pot. It's probably my favorite coffee pot. I have a lot of coffee pots. But this is probably my favorite style because it travels really well. They come in all sizes. This one makes 2 espresso shots. I want to say the biggest one I've ever seen makes 8 or 10 at a time, perhaps. Oh, the ribbon's starting to look pretty nice and thick. Still got that simmer, so you guys don't think I'm lying. If it starts to bubble anywhere stronger than that, then you're going to want to make sure you turn down your pan. Also, if you're doing this in a stainless steel bowl, the bowl tends to get hot a lot faster, so it's easier to do this if you have an oven mitt or a dish towel or something to protect your hand, because you want to make sure you're able to pull this off as soon as needed instead of like grabbing it, oh no, it's too hot, now I have to go find this, and now my eggs have turned into scrambled eggs. So, I know this seems like a lot of effort for a cocktail, I know. But the cool thing is, once you've made the zabaglione, it stays really, really well in your fridge. You can put it in a Tupperware, so you can make a double recipe. If you really end up liking this cocktail, you can make a double recipe and then just store the custard in your fridge and make more the following day. You can make cold ones, hot ones, doesn't matter. So that ribbon is really staying. Are y'all seeing how it's kind of staying on the surface? Almost there, guys. Almost there. This is the important part. I want y'all to know that if you stop cooking it like right about here, that's okay too. The key point is to have all the sugar dissolved. So you can kind of tell it's really smooth. There's very few, if any, sugar crystals left in there. And that's step 1. Once they start to melt, then it's going to start to thicken. And that's just kind of up to your personal preference. So what you want to do is try this out. And then if you get it as thick as I do on camera, then you'll be able to try it in the cocktail. And if you wanted it thicker, you will have cooked this a little longer. And if you wanted it thinner, you probably cook it till about right here. So now that those ribbons are holding on the top fairly well, I'm going to pour in a 1/4 cup of port wine. I'm using a tawny port. You can use a ruby port. Like I said, this is traditionally made with Marsala. If you have leftover wine, which is not a situation I run into very often, Like maybe you didn't drink the last year Cabernet. You could put that in there too. Now see, we got all the way back to a watery base, and that's okay. It's gonna cook right back up, thicken again. So bear with me, guys. I'm gonna take y'all off the hand cam for a sec, and then we'll come back to it when it gets nice and thick. Starting to smell like coffee in here, which is super nice. Starting to smell like wine and sweet stuff. But yeah, this is not difficult. I understand that it can be intimidating. This technique of like over the water can be a little much for people, but I promise it is so worth it. So I know there's also other variations to the bombardino. I think there's, the calimero has coffee. I think there's a version that has chocolate. And I can't remember, but I could look those up if anyone's interested. I can't remember if it's like melted chocolate, if it's like Nutella, if it's chocolate liqueur. And these are, like I said, these are really popular in northern Italy. That's where the Alps are located. So like Turin is the birthplace of something called Gianduja, which y'all might know as Nutella, which is just a hazelnut chocolate blend. And let me tell you, Nutella does not do it justice. It's good. But if you've never had like actual Gianduja, I don't know what it is. It's less processed. It's not as sweet. Now Nutella is a very commercial brand. It's marketed to be able to like spread on things. But Gianduja is something that they fill chocolates with. It becomes like a really soft, creamy center. They'll spread it on toast, but it's not nearly as thick. It's much creamier. Kind of like a whipped cream cheese as opposed to like the block of cream cheese that you get. All right, this is cooking up nicely. Give that a minute, check the coffee. So this is the part that takes a little bit. We wait. Patience, my friends. It is super worth it. Now, in the meantime, while I'm keeping an eye on all of this, I'm going to clutter my station just a little more. And we're going to get ready to make the cocktail. So just so y'all can jot this down, I do post all of the recipes on the Instagram account after the classes. I usually do one a day starting like tomorrow or Tuesday throughout the week. If y'all needed them earlier for some reason because you're prepping for the holidays, just reach out to me. I'll be more than happy to send it to you before I post it. But for this recipe, I'll be using rye whiskey, I'll be using espresso, and I'll be using this port-laced Zabaglione. So the ratios are 1 ounce of espresso, 1 ounce of rye whiskey, and 2 ounces of Zabaglione. Now, there's a lot of information online on how to make a bombardino. Some of them are a 2-to-1 ratio with the spirit to the custard, and that's usually brandy, like I mentioned. So it would be 2 ounces of the custard to 1 ounce of brandy. Some are 1-to-1, and I think it kind of depends on whether or not you're making it homemade or if you're making it with like a pre-bought Zabaglione. You can get those like bottled, the way you get bottled eggnog in the States around the holidays, or like Advocat if you're from like the German area of Europe. So I think because those have more stabilizers in it, you can go a little bit higher on the ratio. But I really enjoy the 2-to-1 ratio. You could try 1.5-to-1. You could try 1-to-1. Tell me what you think. So what I wanted to do was kind of even out that coffee with the whiskey. So it tastes really strong and boozy, but the rye is just kind of complementing everything rather than shining through as the absolute main character. I wanted the main character to remain the Zabaglione because we're putting in this work. It better be the focus, at least in my opinion. If I'm putting in work, I want people to notice. So bring the hand cam back up real quick so y'all can see where I'm at with this. It's really nice and frothy, but it's not super thick yet. But it'll get there. It'll get there. So let's see. It's gonna be, it'll end up being like, it'll grow in volume. It'll get frothier and thicker. So we're gonna come back to that. I just wanted y'all to see where I'm at. I'm also scraping the sides. All the sugar's dissolved. The eggs have been fully incorporated into the wine, so now there's less risk of them setting on the sides of my bowl. But that's what it looks like. So y'all know. Ooh, and the coffee's coming up. As soon as this coffee starts to come through this spout, I'm gonna give y'all like an up-close, in-person view of my coffee maker. I'm gonna make it uncomfortable, but I did make sure that my coffee pot's okay with it. Also, if you make Zabaglione and maybe you overdo it on these cocktails and you don't want any more of these cocktails, Zabaglione is actually used in a lot of desserts. You can put it on top of a cake as a sauce. You can put it on top of ice cream, which is wildly popular in Italy. You can also, if you've ever seen like a layered trifle, like they make in England, where they put cookies and like fruits and custards and creams, you can use a zabaglione as one of those layers. It works really nice in parfaits. I've seen people pour it over like fresh fruit in the morning to have kind of like a dessert style breakfast. Because it's just really nice and airy, fluffy, but also sweet and custardy tasting. It's like the best of both worlds. It's not too heavy, not too light. All right. Doing good, doing good. Still on simmer, not on boil. Coffee's coming in. All right. And I do apologize for the amount of like dead air and the amount of talking I'm doing to fill it. But I wanted to make sure that we weren't multitasking while I was doing this. I've heard from feedback that when I'm doing something on the stove and then moving on to another cocktail, it's harder to kind of just pay attention and focus on the one task at hand. So this is what you get. You get a lot of blabbering from the bartender in the meantime so that we don't have to jump back and forth. Other news to fill in this space while we wait. Next week will be our last class of the year. It has been a wild ride with the pandemic pinup. So for the last class, I decided to take on a challenge. Some people I know in this really awesome virtual group that I'm a part of that meets every week decided to challenge me to make cocktails with cream liqueurs only, or as the base. And I was just like, yeah, that sounds easy. And it was not as easy as I thought, to make them interesting at least. So next week, we'll be doing cocktails and cream instead of peaches and cream. And it will be a really cool little class. We'll be using other cream liqueurs separate from Irish cream, because that's just too easy. All right, it's starting to come up, guys. We can come back to that. But as you can tell, I don't know, maybe it doesn't look super different to you guys yet, but it is getting really nice and creamy. Nice and thick. And then we have our coffee over here. I think that steam's going to make it hard, but it comes through the little spout right there. We'll come back to it as it starts to get to the top, because then you'll be able to see it bubbling up. Scraping our sides. This is almost done. We'll go to prep our stuff in the pot as soon as the coffee's ready. Check on that. So like I said, this makes 2 shots of espresso. I actually use a lot of different types of coffee in there. I don't just use espresso coffee, but espresso grind coffee is the preferred coffee. It makes the best. So I did take an Ethiopian coffee that I had at home today, and then I ground it to be espresso fine, and then I am not making espresso. So if you really want to be a stickler, this is Ethiopian coffee mixed with Italian zabaglione and a Texan version of a cocktail. Yeah, look at that, guys. Oh my gosh, it smells so good. That's what my mornings sound like. I guess y'all can't hear it because it's not able to be heard because I have my phone mic off. But it's this cute little bubble. All right, zabaglione is nice. Now, this is nice and thin. I like it like this for the cocktail, so it's not super heavy. But for all intents and purposes, I'm going to cook it up just a little thicker so y'all can see about how far we take it max. Oh, coffee's ready. Breakfast is poured, or afternoon breakfast. All right, hand cam temporarily suspended. We're going to come back over here real quick, make sure we've got this stirred. We're going to lower that coffee burner. And then I'm going to put this small pot on my burner. Now, this is optional. Traditionally, when a ski resort or a bar or a restaurant is making you a bombardino, they will take the alcohol, put it in one of those little pitchers that they use to froth the milk for a cappuccino or a latte, and then they'll steam it hot. So it just gets really nice and hot. That makes the cocktail wildly hot. So you'll have hot liquor, hot zabaglione, and hot coffee. If you want to sip it immediately, then you're going to want to not heat your liquor. But because I'm going to come back to this after the class is over, I'm going to heat my liquor a little bit. So I have one of my favorite ryes, Pendleton 1910. I'm going to put an ounce of that into my pot. And you would think it goes without saying that if you poured coffee into a jigger, which is made of stainless steel hot coffee, that it's going to heat up the jigger and could potentially hurt you. But just in case it's not common sense, that is your warning. Don't do that. If you have to do that, like I do, because I'm going to measure it out perfectly, grab the bottom part or whatever the part is that you're not measuring into. So I'm going to use an ounce of espresso, put that in there. I have this on low. My Zabaglione is gorgeous. Oh, it's so frothy and beautiful. Let's get that hand cam up just one more time so y'all can really see the Zabaglione before I combine it in. But it's really nice and creamy, guys. It kind of has the texture of like a really beautiful Alfredo sauce. Like you don't want it too crazy thick. But that is the Zabaglione. See, it's nice and thick how it like paints the walls and has to take its time coming down. All right, so that being said, turning off the Zabaglione, and I'm going to add 2 ounces of it to my hot coffee and whiskey. So there's a much better way to do this. Don't do this the way I'm doing this. I didn't think it through that I had to pour this into a jigger. So I'm going to pour 2 ounces of the Zabaglione. You could also just wing it. I don't know if there's such a thing as too much Zabaglione, but it's so delicious. Give it a little swirl. Make sure it all comes together. Oh my gosh, yes. Gosh, that looks so good. Put this over to the side so my Zabaglione doesn't continue to get thick. Bring it all together. All right, so my stove is off. My Calimero riff, also known as Monte Bianco, is just about ready. And I have this really neat little double wall glass, which means it will keep my cocktail hot, but not burn me, which I think is a really nice quality. And now that I have that in there, I'm going to be super extra. And I know I say fresh is best, but sometimes even the best of us get lazy. So if you're doing this at home, please feel free to make an absolutely from scratch whipped cream. But I got some ready whip just because it was fun and it was $2. And why not? Why not? So I'm going to put a good amount of that on there. For the record, if you ever have one of these in Italy, they're so wildly extra with their whipped cream. But that's kind of the beauty of this. And that, guys, is the Monte Bianco. And it's so good. I'm not going to drink this right now because I heated the alcohol, so it's really hot. But a lot of people actually drink these with a spoon. And I know that sounds weird because you obviously don't drink with a spoon, but what that means is they kind of start mixing in a little bit of the whipped cream to cool off certain sips. Take a sip, mix in a little more whipped cream and so forth, so it stays nice and hot. And then some of the cocktail mixes into the whipped cream, and then you can kind of spoon it in your mouth. You can put a cookie in it. It's so playful, so delightful, and oh, so tasty. But that is sadly the end of our 12 cocktails of Christmas. It has been an absolute pleasure to prepare these for you guys. If you need another 12 options, I did an entire secondary 12 cocktails of Christmas series for Cocktail and Sons, the super awesome syrup company out of Louisiana. They have been posting daily new cocktails, and they will continue to do so all the way up till Christmas on their Instagram account. Tons of recipes, really, really fun stuff. How to make homemade eggnogs, hot butter rums, all kinds of crazy cool stuff. But yes, next week we will be doing cream liqueurs in cocktails, and then there will be a brief hiatus in January while I prepare for the new year and all of the new up-and-coming information that I'm going to put out there, and how we will be migrating to different forms of communication. So stay tuned. Come drink with me next Sunday. Thank you for being here, whether you are in the Zoom or creeping on Facebook, or you're watching this later on the YouTube channel. It doesn't really matter. I'm just glad you stopped by. I love hearing about it when you try these cocktails, whether you like them or hate them. I really just enjoy the feedback. It gives me something to look forward to. So please feel free to reach out. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the live stream. So if you're not in the Zoom, you don't get to hang. So sorry. But I'll see y'all next Sunday. Stay boozy and Merry Christmas.